Good afternoon, everyone. I'm hoping that you can all hear and see us. And thanks for joining this afternoon's session. I'm Stef Kenyon from the Association of British Insurers. I'm Head of Campaigns and Marketing here. And within that, lead on our diversity, equity and inclusion work with our members and the sector as a whole. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Rose O'Reilly from Grayce, who are focused on training graduates and embedding them within our sector, to share her perspectives, from James Hartley, Global HR Leader at Swiss Re, who have some interesting programmes and agendas in place on attracting talent and connecting talent attraction to purpose within career development. And then last but not least, Emma Francis, who is Global Inclusion Lead at Ageas, who can bring her experience and perspectives on culture and inclusion and diversity and how that is linked to talent attraction and retention from across the industry. So without further ado, we'll get into the meat of the session and start to explore some of the key questions that we have on our agenda today. So I'll turn first to you, Rose. Given your work with firms in the sector and the focus on the graduate level, so that beginning point in terms of attracting people to our industry, and your exposure to the market, what do you see as some of the common themes in skills demand, and where might there be crunch points that we would experience as a sector and how we might address them?
Brilliant, thank you so much, Steph. Okay, fantastic. So from a Grayce perspective, we support data, tech and change, and over the last few years, we've seen a really high increase in the need for data and tech resources. It's no surprise as a result of the pandemic, we've seen an accelerated need in digital innovation across insurance, and the opportunities that has created and the different roles and the different types of skills that are needed have changed. So it is actually a blend of hard and soft skills that we're seeing the need for, especially within that young talent end of the market, and we'll touch on both actually. The types of projects that we've seen come through that need that tech and data resource are around modernising claims journeys, making sure that digital journey is completely smooth, minimal touch points. We've got all generations represented in the workforce as well, so it's really diverse. But then also some of the harder skills, if we go into the detail around that cloud-based software, Azure, AWS, there's a real need to move from physical servers to virtual. And with that, cybersecurity, keeping all of our data safe, ensuring that all of our data is safe and protected, and all of our consumers are too. But then also from a user experience perspective, so all of the websites streamlining, ensuring that the back-end technology is upgraded so that it's fast for people to access. And then we've seen a real sort of shift in the languages and programming. So Java has been overtaken in the last 5 years by Python, but it has really highlighted the need that for individuals and the people in the workforce to be really adaptable. Being able to adapt to change, because change is absolutely inevitable and will happen quite often. Scarily, I read last week that technical skills have a half-life of 2.5 years. I mean, that's not a lot. There's continually learning. Actually, we need innovative people in the workforce so that we can drive more innovation. We've got disruptors entering the traditional market quite regularly now as well. So that diversity of thought is really important. We're seeing the need for resilient, intellectually curious people as well, to be able to relearn those skills, drive innovation, and the new definition of talent I was reading is that it's something that can't be replicated by tech or robots or AI. We can innovate as people, technology can't. So it's important that whilst we have that hard skill, we have the hard skills, we absolutely have the soft skills, and we're developing our workforce to be continual learners as well. That's really important. Sorry, I've waffled a little bit there, Steph, but hopefully that answers the question.
No, that's really interesting. That 2.5 year sort of shelf life for skills is startling, but very evident anecdotally as well in terms of that constant training piece, and that's sort of where those areas come out. Are there areas where you're seeing particular shortages in terms of skills demand at the moment, or is it generally keeping ahead of that curve where the challenge comes, Rose?
So shortages in skills demand. So data for definite data analysis, cyber security and information security, there's a real need to find talented individuals to fill those types of spaces. So I'm really keen to hear others' perspectives of that and whether you're seeing similar as well. From a tech perspective, that need for cloud architecture as well, so being able to design and actually use and make it fit for purpose as well for your firm as well, and sort of create that. But certainly, data, information security are some of the core need at the moment that we're seeing.
So James, building on that picture from Rose from the market perspective, as a practitioner, does that resonate for you at Swiss Re in terms of the areas that you're seeing both challenge and growth and demand for?
It does, absolutely, but both in terms of the demand and that increased pressure on finding new skills, but also on the skills that Rose talked about, cyber, data, security, cloud, and those are all new skills that our sector is looking at. And I think what's really interesting is the pace with which we need those new roles. To Rose's point about the half-life of skills, that's increased incrementally. And it's not just hiring those skills for the sake of those skills. This is a real business-led challenge. We're talking about end-to-end digital transformation. We're talking about new products, new solutions coming ever faster to the market. And for us in our sector, where we're used to normally perhaps a slower pace of decision-making, and certainly those long-tail decisions, that the whole challenge of bringing in tech and data talent quickly at the right time for the right roles is a clear challenge. Just to add a couple of data points to what Rose was talking about to highlight the scale of the challenge. From a recruitment perspective, the best candidates in tech and data are now only on the market for a maximum of 10 days. And if colleagues' experience is anything like ours at Swiss Re, ours is probably 3 or 4 times that in terms of time to hire. 70% of candidates get turned off if they hear somebody's had a bad experience. We only have a fraction of the tech market, 10%, who are actively looking for those new roles. And when there's such demand and such short supply, that really requires a different way of looking at skills, and particularly when those tech talent are far more likely to be attracted by recommendation or referral than by a traditional sourcing method. And I think that and the pace and the business need all puts real pressure in the system for hiring tech talent.
That's really interesting, and those data points just showing just quite how fast-paced the market is and how we as an industry need to be moving to respond to that, but also from a functional point of view. Could you bring in some sort of practical examples about how you've adapted to that business need at Swiss Re in terms of the pipeline and those processes?
Sure, happy to. And there's 2 or 3 areas, Steph, that we've been working on proactively. One is more broadly across the people agenda at Swiss Re, with a real shift to an employee-centric view. So we're trying to speed up decision-making, flatten hierarchies. We've introduced continuous performance management conversations without ratings, so putting much more control in the hands of individuals to prompt those conversations. Have a big culture program around leadership from every seat, really trying to encourage those decisions at the lowest level of the organization, and then digitalizing learning so it's more of an on-demand nature. If we look specifically in the Digitech portfolios, I think there's a couple of things that stand out. One is a real shift to agile structures. So not just the superficial agile working of being able to work remotely or work from home, but a genuine shift in our organization structure to 5,000 colleagues now working in an agile setup. And that's not only about an organization design, it is around a culture of decision-making, of speed of decisions, empowerment, a more rapid view of emerging priorities. So there's a whole ecosystem now around Agile that goes beyond the superficial. And then finally, within tech, really focusing on rebranding ourselves. So the strategic mission is now moving from being a risk knowledge company, which many people listening today will know Swiss Re for, to being a data and tech enabled risk knowledge company. And that means that our employee branding, our language that we use going to market has to be different. And with that go-to-market approach, we need to be faster and more effective in our recruiting. So we are looking at agile ways of recruiting. We're looking at network referrals. How can we get more people in through our community? And whilst it might sound super basic, actually activating our own engineering community to talk about the things that are important to them, not just some things that we dream up in HR or in the business, but really taking those links, those insights, and that pride from our own engineering community to be the best ambassadors in a new go-to-market approach.
Thanks, James. That's really interesting insights there. And I think we'll come back to the point around attracting and branding at an industry level as well later on in the discussion. So some interesting points to draw out there in more detail. So Emma, moving to you, sort of nodding to some of James's examples there, but would you sort of share your perspective from Ageas in terms of what you found to have a positive impact in this space, particularly?
Yeah, so a lot of what Rose and James were saying resonated with our situation in Ageas. I think everyone in the market, and indeed across the whole world really, we've got a challenge in terms of recruitment, lots of vacancies, including in our IT space. And I guess I'm obviously here with my inclusion hat on, but we've been thinking across the whole business about how we use inclusion to support our recruitment challenges. So in the IT space, this has sort of taken a number of forms. And I guess our greatest inclusion challenge or sort of biggest in terms of number of people in our IT team is lack of women. So we're 29% female in the Ageas IT team, and they're at all levels. So we have a relatively small pay gap in that team. And it's really, each function has its own D&I plan in Ageas because we've all got slightly different D&I challenges depending on the function. And the IT team are very focused on getting the word out about roles in IT and about the sheer breadth of roles, and that it's not all about being a programmer or a techie, and the fact that you can move from different functions, whether it be underwriting or claims, and there are roles for you in IT. And acknowledging the sort of the challenge around resource and the opportunity to grow our own, we've established a degree-based apprenticeship with Exeter University, which has it's been a bit of a pilot in Ageas, but it's brought some amazing people on board and really, very, very positive experience. But something we've seen there is a lack of female students applying for that apprenticeship. It's all paid for, you get a degree at the end of it, great work experience, paid to get a degree, but just not getting the female applicants. So part of our IT D&I plan is to do that outreach work with school leavers, sixth formers, because we see the sort of problem starting there. And it's a shame, isn't it? Because it's such a great career, so many opportunities, but seemingly the word's not out there. So we have other actions as well. I'm sure we'll come to those later, Stef, but I just thought it would be interesting to mention that particular challenge, and if we could get more women interested in this sector. And I don't know why there aren't, it doesn't seem to appeal as much, but we're trying to do our bit to look into it.
And that really resonates. If I could just comment on that, I think what it really has to speak to is a need for us to be radical about non-traditional methods of recruitment. We do need to look at different sources, different partnerships. So sort of programs that Grayce runs, Code Girls First, Digital Futures, that are not only looking at different gender sources, but also different social mobility backgrounds, and really broadening that inclusion in the recruitment practices, I think is absolutely critical to success in the future.
Just to touch on that as well, Jess, completely agree. And sort of from a partnerships perspective, you know, and Emma, it's not surprising that you're not seeing as many females actually applying, because it starts before they even come into university. So, you know, they're at A-levels, 16 to 18 years old, and finding the right partnerships to make to support. I'm happy to share some links afterwards, but we partner with a company called Code Nation, and we support coding boot camps for 16 to 18-year-olds. So they starting to learn, they're starting to understand more about it, and employers can fund Code Nation. It goes throughout, you know, and on after 18 as well, and they're doing huge amounts of work for women in tech as well. So yeah, I think it's all about our partnerships, learning from each other, collaborating. But the problem does go back quite far, actually, unfortunately, for you know, women in tech. So yeah, great to hear you sort of hearing the same thing, really.
Yeah, and Rose, it's good to hear about the work that you're doing in that space, and it is how do you target those interventions at the right point. So when we come to the point of talent pipelines, the ship has not already sailed, or not missed the boat, mixing metaphors there. And do you find with those that there is a commonality, as James mentioned, with intersectionality and those non-traditional forms of recruitment? Because if you are looking at the intersections with gender and, for example, socioeconomic diversity, are you finding that there are challenges where those intersect?
Yes, and I think there are lots of things that we can do to improve that as well. So what we do is look at gender neutral job adverts, you know, really clear. We celebrate a wide diverse of different people across all of our channels, and we really celebrate women in tech and make sure that that's completely, you know, advertised throughout. You know, it's ensuring that, you know, you can't be what you can't see. It's, you know, they can really see, it's really visible. And they feel supported, they feel like they can bring their authentic selves to work. When we try and do that, as soon as you start the digital journey with us and you start that application program, right through to being deployed, that's something that sits across the whole piece, I suppose, for us particularly.
Yeah. And I guess if we got a duality of a challenge when it comes to attracting people for these roles, in terms of the general attractiveness of and knowledge, I guess, of insurance as a career, and then combined with the tech and data angle as well, does that sort of lead to a confluence of a double negative, essentially, particularly when you're looking at gender? Have you found that, Rose, in terms of sort of your experience with graduate market, recruitment market, that people are sort of slightly more hesitant, and then when you're looking at the more, I guess, specific and niche areas of what we do, that it's then a sort of extra challenge to jump over?
Yeah, I mean, for us, so I support insurance at Grayce widely, and we have a wide range of different practices that we support. And one thing that we are really trying to do with our insurance practices is making insurance a really attractive place to work, and shout about and promote about all of the fantastic innovation that's happening. Arguably, there's probably more innovation that's happening in insurance at the moment to get to this, you know, digital transformation than other industries that we see and we support. We had a Changing the Face of Insurance webinar that we ran in February this year, where we were looking at perspectives from different insurers that we work with, but also this is the brilliant, you know, things that we're doing, and actually promoting that. I think we need to get better at promoting some of the fantastic work that we're doing in insurance, and in terms of I guess that promotion. So quite often our analysts will say, oh, you know, I really want to work in fintech, and, you know, they choose their different practices, but it's never seems to be insurance. And we really want to change that, because actually we've got so much that we could be doing here, and what could we be doing more of to promote some of the fantastic work that they could be getting involved with. And James, you touched on it a bit with, you know, rebranding and looking at the way that you can entice more people in, and, you know, and MOE apprenticeships as well. As we're doing the great things, actually, so it's small steps at the moment.
And it's something we often hear here at the ABI from our members and from various people of that kind of, we know there's exciting things, how do we get those message out there? Emma, James, does that resonate with you both as employers and as brands?
Yeah, it's across the whole of insurance job market, really, isn't it? To sort of get people to understand that insurance is a great career, that it's sort of intellectually stimulating, it's, you know, lots of different things that you can get into, and that you know, it's often, you know, insurers tend to be really good employers. You know, you can have a great career that can take you globally if you want, but you know, I'm preaching to the converted here. It's getting that message out, and it's really hard, isn't it? And we've just got to plug away. But I think there's, when we are recruiting, you know, we put a lot of emphasis on our inclusive commitments in terms of being a place of employment. And I obviously would sort of bang on about this, wouldn't I? But I think, you know, particularly to everyone, but particularly to the generation coming into the workplace now, they want to know what we're doing in terms of ESG, how we engender diverse and inclusive workplaces, and also, you know, the flexibility. And I think the post-pandemic, talking about allowing employees to work flexibly, not requiring them to come into the office 5 days a week, empowering them to run their days. These are all really attractive things to the talent out there. And there is a little bit of a debate at the minute, isn't there, about, you know, how many days in the office is right, and you must, or telling civil servants to come back to the office. But, you know, we really see that we have actually very little choice. If we want to get the best talent, we need to provide that flexibility. And actually, you know, we think that's fine. You know, the experience of the last couple of years has been extremely positive. And in our IT department in particular, I don't know if this is, you know, others on the call experience this, they've been particularly keen to not be told to come into the office 2 days a week. You know, we've moved to now where you be in the office when you need to be there. And that's, you know, reflective of what they've asked for, really. And I think, you know, there's no point being forced to come to the office if you're just going to sit behind a computer and, you know, not engage with anyone on that particular day. So that sort of philosophy of presence with purpose, you know, come to the office when you need to, but, you know, if you don't, otherwise you don't need to. That's all what we see as part of our attraction strategy. We're not the biggest brand in the insurance market, so, you know, people might not have necessarily heard of us, but, you know, if you can get these messages out about what an attractive workplace it is, it definitely helps.
Yeah, and building on that, Stef, I agree with your premise that there is almost a double-edged challenge for the sector, and the challenge is we're not seen as digital or tech organisations, and actually that often masks a reality, because certainly if you look at Swiss Re, we're one of the biggest data aggregators in the world across multiple sectors: property, casualty, life and health, and therefore the opportunities within that are massive. But we've got to go head to head with the pure tech play firms. But I think there are 2 or 3 things that we could do a better job of doing in the sector to start addressing that challenge. The first is around creating purpose and a sense of impact. And Emma touched on that with sustainability. You know, purpose, it becomes a bit of a buzzword, but for me, it really is the key that opens the doors to the next generation of talent. So at Swiss Re, we talk about making the world more resilient. And as we talk not only to tech talent, but to underwriting colleagues and claims colleagues, we talk about how we're trying to close the protection gap, how we rebuild communities devastated by natural disasters, not from a charitable position, very much from a commercial perspective, but really trying to create that bigger connection to a sense of purpose and meaning in society. The second thing is we need to do better at actually showcasing some of the really cool work that our techies and our data colleagues actually work on. And I think that's one of the biggest attractions to a tech community, when an internal tech community is showcasing what they're actually working on. So it's very easy to put an employee branding proposition out there, a new focus, but until we actually showcase some of the really cool cutting edge things that are going on in the industry, that's going to be less of an attraction. There is a third element which opens up that broader cultural topic about needing to demonstrate that we can work at pace, that we are flexible, that not everything is slow, conservative and consensus driven. And we cannot ignore the absolute correlation between how impactful and effective your culture is and how likely you are to attract talent to work in that type of environment. And often we fall into the trap that retention starts and ends with recruitment. Actually, recruitment is just such a small part of that whole problem that if you hire great, flexible, talented individuals into a conservative, hierarchical, waterfall environment where they don't see the mentorship, they don't see the role models, they don't see the flexibility, then your tenure with those individuals is going to be much shorter and a much more damaging reputation than building in the market.
That's really interesting, and actually it pulls out a question that we've had in from Leonora Brown in the audience around what the role from your perspective, Emma and James, I think initially, and then perhaps Rose, if you have an angle on it as well, of leadership within an organisation, both at a senior level and at the managerial level, and sort of telling that story and being part of the journey that needs to happen within firms and collectively within the sector to sort of tell that story and bring the narrative alive.
Will I start, James? So I don't know whether to jump in or not. But well, I was going to mention actually that we have a specific leadership program for our IT leaders, as well as a great deal of investment in sort of technical skills. So apparently we spend more in IT than we do anywhere else. And I guess it's to Rose's point, those skills are always changing and ever evolving. But I think the leadership one is important because particularly if you come from a very technical background, you might not have been a leader for very long, and just understanding what leadership looks like, those soft skills are so important in this field. And we've got some great role models in our IT function, people who have been in the armed forces, who have come across from other industries as well, who are able to sort of be great role models in terms of that leadership, and who can exhibit great leadership behaviours and acknowledge that it's not all about those technical skills. It's actually probably more about those softer leadership skills, the innovative, the working at pace that James was talking about, being agile, being very collaborative. Those skills are so much in need, and actually you can learn the technical ones, but it's more about those softer skills that are so critical.
Yeah,
over to you, James.
And I absolutely agree with Emma, but I think there's a really interesting paradox that we've almost got to face. That on the one hand, we need much stronger, much more visible role models and leaders who can be the face of a different way of doing things, whilst at the same time really encouraging that leadership at the lowest possible level. And driving that empowerment, that ownership that we talked about. And it's a real challenge to develop leaders who are able to create that impact, but to do it in a very authentic, human and non-hierarchical way. So I think the real shift from seeing leaders purely as the figureheads and in that command and control structure, to leaders who are humble, who are hiring people better than them, who are different to them, and actually enabling and encouraging that dynamic. So I think that's really critical. But you then got to have that culture where leadership at the lowest level is taken seriously. So particularly in tech, if you're in those fast, iterative, innovative cycles of development, having somebody who's nurturing that rather than somebody that's stopping it is critical. There is a related point that we shouldn't ignore of the development, though, of expert career paths. So I absolutely agree that the leaders of the future are more likely to be generalists, or more likely to be able to pivot across different parts of the organization. But where we have real deep technology expertise, how do we build that? How do we nurture that? And how do we create career paths for that when, as Rose rightly said earlier on, that might be a 2.5 year shelf life? So unless you're constantly investing in what an expert looks like, then you're going to fall short anyway. And then particularly if your culture isn't resonant with what leaders of the future want.
I completely agree. You know, when you're both Emma and James, when you're talking about the soft skills that are needed, that authenticity, the trust, it's all really, really important. And in terms of, you know, some of the skills that you know, people want, it is that authenticity, and it is that caring nature that does. I want vulnerability as well, because actually it shows that makes them a little bit more human, makes them a little bit more like us, you know. But also there's career stories. You could do knowledge exchanges and knowledge sharing, where, you know, they're talking about some of the career stories. I mean, at Grayce, we've just launched reverse mentoring, walk a mile in shoes. So we could do reverse mentoring, as well as loads of different things that actually we could get visibility for our leaders and get them out, you know, a little bit more, make them a little bit more visible, more human as well. I'm more than happy to share the white paper that's been released on that as well. So yeah, couldn't agree more, basically.
Fantastic to have that sort of perspective and agreement from all of you there, notwithstanding the challenge of marrying all of those different sort of elements. James, I think you're absolutely right in terms of that. It's got to be top down and bottom up in order for it to be an effective and holistic vision, and the structures needing to be in place to enable those, both the skills to thrive, but also for the leadership to sort of develop and be aware of what's required in future from their workforce. And I guess building out that point on leadership, and Emma, perhaps coming to you first with your inclusion hat on, that element of leaders and organisations being ever more focused on diversity, equity and inclusion, and something that we work on very closely with all of our members at the ABI here, is how do you get that culture, and can you build a culture inclusively as an organisation to help attract and retain the right talent? And what are the key things, the key elements that you need to drive that, both from a leadership perspective, but also from a wider organisation?
Wow, well, Stef, you'll know that, yeah, that's a big job, isn't it? You can absolutely build an inclusive culture, and I'm sure that's what everyone aspires to have on this call. But it can be quite a long journey, and I think, and it does start from leadership. So if your leaders are committed, you know, are willing to call out non-inclusive behaviours, or, you know, inappropriate behaviours, that's where it starts. And, you know, our industry has moved on so much, hasn't it? I mean, I joined the industry in 1999. It was quite a different place then. And I think even the last 10 years, we've really come on a journey in terms of understanding the value of diversity, understanding that sometimes some people have not always felt welcome in our industry, and that's bad for our industry. It's bad for our customers, it's bad for our businesses, and it's just not fair, actually, which is, you know, we all want our friends, family to be treated with fairness, don't we? It's a sort of pretty basic thing. So but to a point we were discussing earlier, I think, you know, the sort of people coming into organisations now, they do want to know that they're coming into an inclusive organisation, purpose-led, as James said. And, you know, we, as insurance companies, have got a really good story on that front. We are absolutely purpose-led, and we're, you know, provide really important products and services, but we perhaps need to do more to explain that. But absolutely, when we are going out to recruit, we really emphasise the inclusive nature of our organisation. I'm sure lots of people on the call have got employee resource groups where employees get involved in driving the inclusion agenda, pushing our businesses to be even better than they are, and that's from both an employee perspective and a customer perspective. So a bit of a sort of waffly answer to your question, Steph, but so I think it's a really important issue, isn't it? Yeah, it is a big one, isn't it? Where do you start? But it's absolutely possible, but it does require a lot of work, and it's something that we've definitely got a long way with, I think, in our industry, but definitely more to do.
Yeah, and I think it's great to see that the debate is moving on past the pure demographic view of diversity, and I don't want to diminish that at all, because we've still got a huge amount to do, both in terms of gender representation, ethnic minority representation, but that broader focus on inclusion. Am I heard? Am I valued? Is my opinion listened to? I think it's that type of soft skill, and Rose mentioned it earlier, that's going to be the paradigm shift, particularly in an expert culture where we've got, underwriters who've been plying their trade for 20, 30 years. We've got to start fostering a culture where we listen, and be prepared to be challenged, that there might be a different view of expertise, or there might be a different outcome given how fast the world of work is now changing. And the more we can focus on that inclusion aspect, the more diverse candidates will apply, the greater the equity will be in the organisation. But we can't underestimate the power of listen.
Yeah. And just to touch on those points as well, I mean, I think you're both doing brilliant jobs at the moment. I mean, 29% of females that are in IT is quite high, unfortunately, in comparison to about 18% industry average. So, it's clear to see that, it's working, from a perspective of what we are seeing, what our young talent is telling us is probably about 95% of the time we get quizzed on what are we doing from a D&I perspective. So this is our interview stage before they accept our offer. What are our stats like? What are their stats like on the board? What are you doing for sustainability? What are you doing for CSR? What are you doing for charity? There is a real need for purpose-driven work, but also, how, delivering work that is of value and good. And that's what they really want. And that's the sort of things that we're hearing at Grayce, for definite.
Yeah, and it's how do we respond to those? I think it's particularly an area that we've seen and heard from the industry at the ABI, is that how do we deliver on some of those in a really impactful way? And as you said, James, really pulling it beyond the measurement of statistics and characteristics, and then actually making sure that the culture is there, because the culture has to be right in order to get the data and the measurement correct as well, and the two are very sort of connected. And that's what the market these days is demanding when they're looking at where they want to work, and how we convey that narrative of the sector that is driven and underpinned fundamentally, historically, by purpose-driven work. And the exciting things, as we've all mentioned, that are going on in the tech space particularly, and the innovation that's happening there is really about a story that we can tell and articulate to the job market. And just pulling a thread there that has come up, and we've touched on it in a couple of areas. Emma, I know you mentioned flexible working, and James, you talked about real, meaningful, impactful agility. We've had a question around internal policies and offers on an access and benefits perspective to appeal to diverse candidates. And we at the ABI have done a variety of work with our members on that, including the Making Flexible Work Charter, which we launched last year. We've had a 40% increase year on year in terms of the number of firms involved and committed to that charter, which is essentially about making sure that it's possible for people to work flexibly, and that can be in all forms, part-time, job sharing, essentially to address both the motherhood penalty, where people are dropping out at that mid to senior level, but also wider characteristics where flexible work, as we all know, having experienced the last 2 years, has become more prevalent. But are there other policies that, Emma, James, you have put in place as firms, and Rose, that you've seen the sector starting to move towards and adopt, that can have a real impact in terms of attracting and that diverse talent? I'm thinking of there's a behavioural insights team fact around that if you put job sharing part-time at the end of a job advert, you can increase your talent pool by 40% when it comes to diverse characteristics. Have you seen similar things work from an Ageas and Swiss Re perspective? James, do you want to go first?
Certainly, I'm happy to start on that. I mean, I absolutely agree that it requires constant evolution and constant investment. What might have worked 5 years ago doesn't work now. I think there's a couple of things. One, don't underestimate the power of visibility around your diversity agenda. And you may have seen Swiss Re has a global stance of lighting up all of our buildings for Pride. We're one of the first companies in to do that. And that's far more than window dressing. It sends a really strong, powerful signal into the market. From a policy perspective, one example, we've moved globally to embassy status from an LGBTI plus position, which means that all employees globally have access to the same level of benefits and sexuality neutral policies. We've introduced gender neutral toilets in a number of our locations, and these are relatively low cost, visible signals of a deeper change. Around the flexibility piece, I agree that to me is fundamental in attracting a diverse workforce, not just from a gender perspective, but from a generational perspective. In Zurich, we now publish all of our roles as being 80 to 100%. And exactly as you say, Stefan, from the research, that encourages a higher number of candidates applying and a higher rate of acceptance. So I think there are things that you can do from a policy perspective and from a visibility perspective that redefines your public image in this space.
Yeah, I would, similar position at Ageas, and we've signed up to the ABI's Flexible Working Charter, of course, and really in all our job ads, like James says, we include a commitment to be open to flexibility in all its forms, so part-time job share, but also flexibility of location. It's just that message about come and have a conversation with us and talk to us about what flexibility you need. And I think that's just enormously powerful in terms of attracting the best talent. In terms of specific policies, obviously we always review for inclusion, and things like sort of maternity and paternity leave we're looking at currently to sort of see if we can, that was certainly it's inclusive of all employees, but obviously there's a lot of movement in the insurance industry to move to parental leave for everyone, no matter whether what your position as parent is, and we review all our policies for inclusion, but also sort of emphasize our sort of internal commitment when marketing our roles, so the colleague resource groups, the work we do with customers, our ESG messaging. It's all part of what it is to work in our company, and so it's not just 28 days holiday that's going to attract you. It's the commitment to ESG, the purpose-led, the opportunity to grow, our commitment to L&D, that sort of thing. It's all part of the package, isn't it?
Yeah, and Rose, have you seen that in terms of your comments around purpose and those ESG policies, etc.? Are they now as important to candidates as the hard benefits package that people offer?
Absolutely, and more often than not, they will ask about our diversity and inclusion, sustainability, and CSR over benefits package and some of the and there's been a real seismic shift actually. In the want to be able to deliver something that is doing something of benefit, really, and that is really important to draw out. But it sounds like Emma, James, you've both been implementing some brilliant initiatives that will absolutely be including everyone into that, which is so important as well. Yeah.
So I take from all of you there that your advice to those on the call thinking about how they implement these in their own sort of talent policies is think about the big picture as a whole and look at what that offer is, bring in the narrative and the employer branding story as well as the benefits and the policies. It has to be a combination of those different elements to be successfully attractive to candidates.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in large corporates and even in smaller organizations, it's hard to get to that true customized, personalized experience that we see in the marketing and consumer experience. But the more we can bring that philosophy in, the more we can bring choice and flexibility into the employee experience, recognizing that we perhaps can't go as far as kind of mass personalization of benefits, but the more optionality that we can offer our employees and making them truly the center of the employee experience, and that the policy in process not being the center of the experience, that's where I think we'll start seeing a shift in the dynamic.
Yeah. And Rose, were you going to add in the one thing that people should think about there? Is there something on that?
Well, I was just reflecting that actually one initiative that has actually been so beneficial for us and our culture and inclusivity is it has been our diversity and inclusion initiative. It's run by analysts for analysts. They run it all. It's split out into the separate characteristics. Everyone has. Tomorrow we've got a Pride talk where we've got our LGBTQ plus community talking about their experiences, how to be more inclusive at work, from that standpoint, but across all really sort of knowledge sharing, continually learning, continually educating ourselves. And that's been really, really important. And some of the feedback we've been getting from our analysts is it's great to be part of a community where I feel actually I can be part of Grayce, but also joining the groups where I feel represented and I feel safe in my community, and I know that it's been supported, has gone a long way. So yeah, it's just reflecting on that sort of thing, really.
Yeah, it's absolutely that employee-led sort of activity can be so fundamental to an employer brand, but with all of the different things to keep up with, it's important not to forget that in the mix, because those are the people that once you've onboarded someone that will bring it to life, and those are the networks, and as you say, Rose, that they'll reach to for support and affinity and building that culture as well through that work.
And I would add to that there is great passion and great creativity within our employee base for some of these activities. That doesn't have to reside in the HR function or a business sponsor. We launched last year our Net Zero U2 program, which is our employee sustainability initiative. And the ethos of it is co-created and iterative. And it's amazing to see when you spark a conversation, just how much of a joint movement you can create. And I think that's really the direction of the future, that it is these self-empowered groups, it is these self-run, self-curated initiatives that are going to have the most impact, rather than big top-down organisation-heavy initiatives. So, let's unlock the potential, let's unlock the passion that exists within our existing workforce and use that as part of our vehicle for a joint movement, rather than trying to stifle it and create it and over orchestrate it.
So harness the enthusiasm of your workforce. Yeah, absolutely. So I've just one more question on the sort of inclusive and policy point of view from one of the audience, which is around a specific, and I know we mentioned earlier, looking at inclusion as a whole rather than specific characteristics, but just drawing out, as I think we're all aware, the challenge within the sector of the pipeline for Black and minority ethnic talent into and remaining in insurance. Do we feel that progress is being made at that level, and is there more we can do to develop and support and foster that particular area when we look at the sector as a whole? We found within our data at the ABI that there has been an increase, but at different levels, and particularly of relevance for this group, that sort of technical specialist non-manager being a little bit in decline when it comes to Black and ethnic minority representation. So is that something that you've experienced, James, Emma, within your firms?
So it's definitely a challenge. It's a bit of a loaded question. Are we doing enough, and can we do more? The answer is yes, we can do more, and no, we're not yet doing enough. I think the reality is that it's now a topic of conversation that perhaps wasn't even on the agenda as it should have been a number of years ago. And any change starts with the conversation. So the fact that there is a spotlight on it, the fact that it's been talked about, the fact that we're now starting to measure it, I think are all good signs. Again, for me, it can't be an exclusive inclusion policy. So if we're serious about attracting the best talent, irrespective of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, social mobility, we've got to take that holistic approach to it. And the more that we focus on each of the component parts, the better the overall impact will be. But if we're talking about a need to level a playing field, which is currently not even in the insurance sector for Black and ethnic minority candidates, we've clearly got to continue an area of focus, and we've clearly got to do more than we're doing now. Just
to touch on that, James, completely agree with the exclusive inclusion. We shouldn't be targeting, but from a, I guess if we're looking at a celebration of a diverse workforce as well on all different, forms, media channels, website, etc. But also at Grayce, we've got 41.2% ethnic minority groups, which is brilliant. But we do that through an inclusive, journey, through promotion of different, diversities that are sort of completely celebrated. And it's really important that people do feel represented, and there is a whole "you can't be what you can't see" and all of that, and that is really important, and it goes a long way.
And I would just sort of add that we as an industry have obviously sort of had a big focus on this, particularly in the last couple of years, and particularly since the sort of George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matters really was a big catalyst for our industry. And I think the first point is that we must measure. So, I hope all organisations on this call are inviting employees to share their data, because you can't without the measurement, you don't know if there's a problem. At Ageas, we have 95% of our employees telling us their ethnicity, so it's really, it is absolutely possible, but it just takes a bit of time to get there. I think the other thing I've seen being very powerful is inviting employees to share their experience of being a colleague of colour in an organisation, because then you hear things that HR didn't know about, and it's those sort of being in a minority, microaggressions, things that if you're white you just won't have been exposed to. And that was my previous organisation, a real wake-up call to understanding that it wasn't always a level playing field. And something we eventually landed on was a real focus on our recruitment process, because what we saw was that we were getting plenty of applicants from ethnic minority communities, but they weren't getting through to appointment. So it was sort of comes back to this point around sort of being rigorous in order to engender diversity and inclusion, and that benefits everybody, not just a particular sort of group, whether it's ethnicity, women, whatever. But just making sure that our recruitment process was really rigorous and that it was done properly, because then there's less opportunity for affinity bias to creep in to, recruit in your own image. And if you are a majority white organisation, unless you do something about it, unless you put those sort of rigorous processes in place, you're likely to keep on recruiting the same type of people. So I think that was, a good starting point, but loads more to do. And as Stef was saying, the numbers have gone down slightly, haven't they, in our industry to 9% ethnic minority, which is slightly down. In the tech area, I would observe that the organisations I've known actually have been very good for our ethnic minority representation, and actually is sort of there is more representation from ethnic minorities in those teams, but still plenty of work to do.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, that sort of cross-functional sharing of best practice as well there, Emma. If there are areas that are successfully doing it, having organisations within the different functions sort of learn from that. And I think your point, both of you, all of you, in terms of that, the structural barriers and then the cultural smaller barriers, so making sure that those conversations are able to happen and that colleagues, regardless of background or experience, can sort of see and hear the reality of some of those issues and concerns. And there's organisations within the sector, so for example, Grayce Action through Leadership, which is looking at a top-down approach of kind of helping open up those conversations at board level in a complement to existing employee resource groups that exist within firms and networks across the sector as well. So it's that combination again of making sure the dialogue is happening and it's not happening in isolation, and that and everybody feels supported. I've just been told that we've got about 5 minutes left, and Sophia and Anthony have asked all of you a polling question, which we've got the results in for. So I'll run through those and my colleagues on the call. So the question asked was, in which roles is the most urgent need for new talent in your organisation? And the results show, I'll go from lower to top. So 13% said support functions, 13% said IT and technology, so some of what we've been talking about today, and then equally 25% data and analytics. And then the largest was insurance expertise, i.e. underwriting, claims and broking at 50%. So some interesting results there. Do those, there's some nods, they resonate in terms of the challenge? James, I'll come to you first. You're sort of smiling knowingly at some of those percentages.
It's perhaps not surprising. We are a very expert, niche-driven industry. So having those core skills for underwriting, claims, broking, perhaps isn't a surprise. But seeing, if you aggregate together data analytics and technology, that probably comes more or less equal playing. And I think the reality is the skill sets that we need over the coming years are going to be different to the skill sets we've had before. You know, if we look even at the underwriting process, at the claims process, there is a likelihood of that being digitalized or automated, or bringing in new analytics to make it successful in terms of our client proposition. So I would argue that over time you can't have one without the other. You will need underwriters who are data savvy. You will need claims experts who understand digitalization, because that's the way the industry is going. So we're perhaps not there yet, but I think it's a clear trend for the future.
Perhaps you'd see that flip in terms of the response in a couple of years' time. Emma, does that feel reflective to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, we to be honest, we've got vacancies across all our areas, but the sort of technical roles, particular challenges. So yes, it's exactly, you know, the same situation, I think, as James, and we just keep trying to be innovative and sort of proactive about getting the message out about our industry. And I think that was reflecting on, you know, actually IT is a great way to bring more diversity into our organisation in terms of experience. So we're obsessed with people in the insurance industry, aren't we? In the insurance industry, and, you know, we sort of tend to recruit people. We're slightly nervous of recruiting outside of the industry, and IT is a great way to bring in different perspectives, different understanding, particularly on sort of customer service and innovative models for serving customers. So we sort of keep promoting it and keep putting out the message that you don't necessarily need 20 years experience in insurance to come and work for us.
But anecdotally, once you're in, you probably will stay.
That's it.
Rose, any final thoughts from you?
Just on the points of the need for the underwriters, what we're seeing now is that support of specialist resources, so to enable them to sort of continue doing the work they need to from a specialist perspective, but then having our Grayce analysts delivering some of the lower level work that, you know, and freeing their time up as well. I've just seen the 1 minute pop up, so I bet I'll stop now.
Yeah, I'm conscious that we may well get cut off, but just to say thank you so much for a really rich discussion there. I think we've touched on all different elements of skills shortages and talent pipeline, but also the inherent need for the industry to tell that story of what a diverse and fascinating sector that we are, and the multitude of career paths that exist within it. As we just touched on there, Emma, I think it's, you don't need the 20 years experience, but once you're in, it tends to sort of grab people and you stay for a while, and making sure that as a sector we're removing those barriers so that people don't feel that they can't get in, but when they do look to progress, that the sector as a whole has the opportunities to help foster and grow and nurture that talent regardless of background or characteristics or experience. So I think just to say thank you very much to Rose, Emma and James for their time today, and thanks to all of you for your questions and for listening in. I'm gonna stop there just in case we get cut off mid-sentence, but thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the session.